Hello and welcome to the Ministry Shift. I'm Simon Foster, a member of Lichfield's mission team, and today, as we head towards the end of a strange old year, the Ministry Shift asks, how do we look back at a year like this? To explore that, I'm delighted to be joined by three people, all serving in different ministries in Lichfield, and they are Philip Swan.
Thank you. I work for the diocese with a world mission enabling role, and the other half of my role is interim ministry, where I'm moving from Stoke to Leek in January.
Thank you, Philip. Welcome to Julia Cody.
Thanks, Simon. I'm Julia. I'm vicar in Purton, which is on the sort of western edge of Wolverhampton, although proudly in South Staffordshire. I'm also rural dean of Treasel. So I think that's all you need to know about me.
Thank you, Julia. And also Jim Trude.
Good afternoon. I'm Jim Trude. I'm rector at St Matthew's Church in Walsall, which is a civic church, but also a parish church.
Thank you, Jim. Great to have you all with us. Many people take the chance over the festive season, and especially after the dust of Christmas has settled, to reflect on the year just past. And I wonder, Philip, whether you have a habit of annual reflection at this time.
I think to a degree. I think for me, it's very much a case of more of the same. And I think increasingly, I do value the process of reflection. And I think I'm learning to carve out the time for it, because I don't think it just kind of happens naturally. And so, I mean, I've got with me, a kind of journal that I now regularly fill in, and I will have a particular focus in these kind of in-between times, where, as it were, the year's sort of transitioning into what to actually kind of reflect further. And I find it will be a time to look back, particularly over, as you said, this most strange year, where my journal, in a sense, has come to life in a way, I'd say, that it hadn't prior to this.
Julia, is this a transition time for you as well?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, it's interesting. As I was thinking about this question beforehand, I've taken up journaling again. I've done it at different seasons in my life, and this year that has really helped. So it's interesting that you said that, Philip. But I was also thinking, this is going to be a slightly strange answer possibly, but one of the key times for me to reflect is actually just before Christmas. I'm one of these dreaded people that writes a round robin Christmas letter at the end of November usually. And actually, whether you love receiving them or hate receiving them, for me, the writing of that letter is really reflective, and actually a really interesting discipline at the beginning of the church year, actually. But that's sort of kind of coincidental, but it does happen then. Because actually I just sit down and I look back through my journal and through my diary, and I jot down all the stuff that's been going on. And obviously that's more kind of physical things, sort of, highlights and everything else. But and we look at lots of photographs. And this year, my husband and I very clearly decided that the letter wasn't going to focus on COVID. And we didn't pretend, but we just, that's everyone's experience. But actually, we wanted to say there have been good things, even though it's been tough. And so we were able to reflect on some of the good stuff. And as you asked the question, Simon, I was thinking, in a way, although it's a practical thing, writing a Christmas letter, it's almost like a kind of an exam and process at the end of the year of looking back. So actually, in a weird way, writing my Christmas letter is one of those things that really helps me.
Jim, Advent, Christmas, New Year, where does reflection land for you, if it does at all at this time?
Well, I often try and do something new during the Advent time. That might be to read a book which has got reflections in it, or perhaps read through a different chapter of Luke's Gospel every day during December as a kind of Advent calendar. But many of my reflections are in the preparations of my sermons, reflecting on how do they connect with the world around us today, and what is God saying into those kind of situations. So it's a different kind of method of reflection, perhaps.
So there's a theme for two of you, for Philip and Jim, about continuing an ongoing reflection, and almost that as kind of the life of the minister. Do you need to step away from that sometimes, do you think, Jim?
Yes, definitely. But I think the thing about Advent and Christmas, it brings a different kind of side to reflection. So some of the reflections I've been thinking about this year in my sermon preparation have been in the now but not yet kind of time of Advent, and how that is very much like COVID Christmas. We're going to be celebrating Christmas in a different sort of way. Next year it'll be different again. But also very much it fits in with the Advent themes as well. We've got now but not yet when it comes to the vaccine. I've also been thinking about Emmanuel, God with us, and what might that mean in a COVID Christmas, and the kind of unexplained Christmas COVID connections, as it were, and the kind of unexpectedness of it, linking with the unexpectedness of Jesus's birth, very much for the people of the day, but also very much for Mary as well.
And of course, that's sort of the fundamental, isn't it, of theological reflection, is bringing what we're wrestling with now alongside our theological tradition, our belief, the story that we tell ourselves every year as Christians. And I mean, I was astonished as I went through theological college, certainly nowadays, how central that skill is to how you're trained. Philip, I'm wondering about how we share that skill, how we share that sort of attitude and those resources with others, maybe in our congregation or even beyond that. Is that something that you've applied yourself to much?
I've wrestled with this in the sense that it can easily be seen as a somewhat sort of rarefied or elitist pastime. Whereas I'm increasingly of the opinion that it's accessible to everyone. So what is the block? And I think it's perhaps using the language we use. It's fascinating. I think I notice in the diocesan vision speaks about identifying where God is already at work. And it strikes me that if you just ask the question, where is God at work? Where is God in this? It opens the door for serious, profound, life-giving, transformative theological reflection. Just to sort of to go with it, to make these most natural kind of points of overlap and integrating the ordinariness of life. And it sounds a bit strange to bring God into it because God is there. So it's a two-way process. But I think that's where the making time in a sort of specific way to take that question forward. I do think questions are just so important, often quite simple questions. I mean, as we look back on this past year, it's hard not to see it as somehow a special opportunity. I mean, I was really struck by, some of you may have come across that poem by Lynn Unger called Pandemic, that came out right at the very beginning of the pandemic, that said, what if you thought of it as the Jews considered the Sabbath the most sacred of times? And I found that question opened the way for me to reflect and to see things quite differently.
Julia, you were nodding through some of that, I think particularly when Philip was talking about questions.
Yeah, well, it just struck me. I mean, I think that idea of just finding the everyday language and just connecting with where people are at, which is where God is at work, as Philip was saying, is absolutely crucial. So whether it's, for me this year, my reflections that going into my sort of preparations has been very much about waiting and about light in the darkness, and that the darkness does not overcome the light. And actually at a point where we're looking for light at the end of a long tunnel, and the tunnel might feel quite bendy, but that reassurance that the light is there, and that's obviously what we prepare for as we head towards Christmas. I think so that idea of sort of connecting with where people are at and the real questions, and when with the questions I was thinking, I mean, one thing we've we've done here this year, which isn't so much about theological reflection particularly, but we've created a sort of a tableau in our church courtyard, being conscious people can't come into the building very easily at the moment. And it's a very simple tableau, but with it is a board that says, and on it says, "I wonder what this scene says to you." And it just asks the question as people pass by. And I've ended up just yesterday having this really interesting Facebook chat with somebody in the village, because the tableau is of Father Christmas and a manger. And the person said, surely you should have a normal nativity because this is the church, which is a valid question. And then to be able to engage with her and talk about why we've chosen to do this and that question, to ponder it. So I think there's lots of people asking questions, and we just need to make the connections, and where God is at work, as Philip said. Yeah.
That's a powerful and sometimes an uncomfortable thing, isn't it, to travel with other people's questions. Jim, how do you help your folks to reflect theologically?
In some respects, I think this year it's been a little bit easier than other years because there are so many opportunities. And one of the things I've noticed in the last couple of months, I've heard of 2 babies being born and their names. One of the names is Hope, and the other name is Raphael, which means God has healed. And linking the idea of names and their meanings, and then looking at Jesus and what does Jesus' name mean, and helping people think through, well, what is Jesus saving us from? So you're actually using where they are to actually allow conversations to flow.
Jim, Philip, Julia, thank you so much. And thank you to all of you who watch this show and keep it ticking over week by week. Next week, we on the Ministry Shift have a slightly different pattern as we drop in on some of the people that you've nominated for the shift that they have made in their own ministry. So do join us again next week at 4:30 on the shortest day for the final show of the year. And finally, if you have any ideas for the Ministry Shift for episodes next year, then do share them with us on the Diocesan Facebook page as we plan for next year's shows. Until next week, from the Ministry Shift, goodbye.